Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Hannah Harris, and I'm the program coordinator with the Sun Valley Institute for Resilience. Our mission as an organization is to invest, educate, and collaborate to ensure that the economy, environment, and people in the Wood River Valley area and beyond can thrive. More recently, we've been focusing on transforming our regional food system and supporting climate smart land management. This is the seventh webinar in our 2024 webinar series, and today we are hosting Ariel Agenbroad from the University of Idaho Extension to discuss community food systems, on-farm food safety, and so much more. Ariel leads and facilitates collaborative and multidisciplinary applied research and education in community food systems and small farms for Payette, Gem, Canyon, Ada, Oahe, and Elmore counties here in South Central Idaho. Welcome, and thank you so much for making time.
Thank you so much, Hannah. I'm excited to be here and talk to you about food systems and small farms.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really great conversation. Before we get into our questions, would you please tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you became inspired to work in food systems?
Sure. Well, I feel like I've been interested in food systems for my entire life because I really like eating. And from a very young age, I was fascinated about the connection between food being grown and produced and being able to eat it. So, grew up in gardens. My family were gardeners. My dad's a soil scientist, so I also grew up knowing about some of the issues that faced agriculture, environmentally and otherwise. But then I went far away from that for a long time. Through high school and early college, I was going to work in a whole different field, but kept getting pulled back to wanting to work in the natural realm, wanting to work with food, wanting to work with plants. Found myself going back to school to study horticulture, agriculture, education. Finally ending up with a master's in plant science horticulture with a focus on organic agriculture, and then was fortunate enough to be able to join University of Idaho Extension in 2007 as a horticulturist. And I worked in Canyon County for about 8 years covering food systems and mostly small farms and home horticulture. And then in 2015, I had the opportunity to take on this area-wide position, really focused on food systems and small farms. And my work has really expanded from being just regional to being rather statewide in some of the areas that I work in, because when you work in a system, you keep expanding that system and that network, and it gets bigger and bigger. And so I do work statewide in a lot of my support of farmers market initiatives, in farm to school, farm to early care and education, really, and actually regionally too, as we look at where our food is produced, where are the different food sheds that feed into Idaho. And as a state with multiple borders to other states, those regions, are not necessarily, food is just not produced across the state line, right? It's kind of the whole region. So really fun work. I enjoy it very much. I feel very fortunate to be involved in this work, and I just absolutely love working with farmers and food producers. It's my favorite.
And you used a really great term that we often use in our work as well. And just in case folks aren't familiar, would you mind taking a moment to explain what a food shed is, please?
Sure. And I don't know if this is the official definition, just like there are many ways to describe something.
Yes.
But I think about a food shed as if you are in a place, so like I am sitting in my office in Boise, Idaho, my food shed would be the area that produces the food that I consume. And typically we look at a food shed in terms of the local food, our local food shed, because really you think about it, we're in a global food shed most of the time. We walk into even Whole Foods or something, the food is coming from everywhere. But we look at where our food locally is produced. Where are the grains? Where's the dairy? Where's the meat? Where's the vegetables? And how are these things grown? And what are the environmental impacts of that? Where are the best places for that to grow? How do they all connect? And how also does that connect with the natural resources that are available to us, the soil, the land, the water, and then also going into the transportation and the processing and all of that. So it's looking at everything that is produced within an area and how those things work together. I think it's like I said, there are a lot of ways to define it, but that's how I think about it.
Thank you for that definition. I feel like you summed it up really well. I feel like more people might be familiar with a watershed, right? So especially in our area that is mostly desert or alpine desert, water comes from snow in the mountains and trickles downstream to lower elevations. And so thinking about food sheds in a similar way visually just helps, I think, a little bit because so many resources do go into growing food and producing food and then also getting it to our plates. So,
I
yeah.
like the food shed model too for thinking about, to me, it makes me want to protect that more, right? When you look
Yes.
at how fragile it is and how necessary it is and really how small our local food shed is when you
Hmm.
look at how many people are growing and producing food. And so yeah, it kind of makes it a little bit more yeah, that brings that visual to it and it really shows it as something special and something to be protected and nurtured.
I love that. Thank you. That actually leads us pretty well into our next question, which is, could you please give us an overview of the current landscape of community food systems in Southern Idaho, where you focus your work, or in the state overall, if you could speak to that?
Sure, sure. And there are a lot of positives. There are a lot of things to be sort of worried about or concerned about. I think I tend to look on the positive side, and it depends
Yes.
on, what day you're talking to me and what I've just been experiencing. But I think in many ways, I look around and I see that we have a really vibrant and robust food system. And we, in Idaho especially, have the capacity to produce so much food. I mean, really, Idaho farmers are feeding the world in a lot of ways. That doesn't always mean that that food is staying close or that that food is usable in the raw form that it's produced in Idaho. A lot of our products are shipped out, processed, maybe come back to us in different ways. Um, we produce way more than we can eat in the state in terms of things like dairy and cheese and potatoes and grains and pulses and beans. I also just love that we are such a major producer of seed crops in Idaho. So we're not only growing food, we're growing future food through our seeds. So yeah, when you look at our big agricultural picture, that is very healthy, very robust, very strong, very profitable, etc. When you look at more of the local food system, so food that is produced and consumed within the geographic area, I see a lot of positives and I see a lot of growth and interest and support, but I also see a lot of challenges too. And these challenges are not anything new, but in some ways they have become um, more acute, more painful as time has gone. And particularly, I'm going to say that that has to do with the cost of land and the access to farming for those who have not previously been involved in it. Um, so I do see a lot of opportunity. I see that the talk about supporting local food is still big. I don't always see that the action follows up with that. But then just thinking back about this last summer, many of our farmers markets in the state claim that they had their best years ever. But then when you actually look at the makeup of our markets, we are seeing a retiring or a diminishing
Yes.
of a lot of the produce growers and the food growers. We're seeing a big upswing in prepared foods, in food products, but in
Mhm.
terms of bringing raw produce, by the table full, we're seeing a little bit less of that. But I also feel like it's a great time for local meat and some of those products too. So yeah, I think that we have a lot going on. We're very fortunate, and especially given our climate in Idaho, that we are able to
Yes.
produce as much local food as we do. Um, yeah, I just think it's wonderful. But we definitely have room to improve.
Yes. One of the challenges that I know has come to my attention more and more over the last year is also development. So the Treasure Valley, as well as where I'm located, the Wood River Valley area, um, both of those areas have seen really immense and rapid growth over the last several years. I mean, driving, out of downtown in Boise, there's so much development. So what are some of the changes you've seen in local Idaho community food systems, besides the ones you just mentioned, due to the huge influx of people moving here?
Yeah. So I think the influx of people, a positive is that it brings in more consumers. Sometimes, consumers from other urban areas of the country who are already kind of versed in buying local. They're here in Idaho. They're celebrating Idaho. They're looking for local products. But I do also see that they don't always understand the seasonality of Idaho foods or why they can't get certain things at certain times. I'd say that probably the biggest impact, well, I mean, because development, yes, we are losing farmland to housing and to residential and commercial development. I don't know that that is always impacting the small F and S local food system, right? I mean, we're losing big farms or big farms are moving out to another area. Um, but where I see that really impacting is that it is becoming less and less possible for someone maybe in their 20s or 30s or even 40s who wants to make a career change or wants to enter into farming, um, being very, very prohibitive in terms of access to land, access to capital to be able to start a small farm. And so the size of smart farms, I think, has gotten smaller to where we're seeing like an upswing in like the micro farm scale.
Hmm.
But how the potential for that to be profitable or to feed large numbers of people, I think is very limited. So I sometimes wonder about that. On one hand, I like the idea of more people getting into micro farming and being more self-sufficient. But I also worried about what that means for our consistent local supply of food. And also, as it gets more congested and busier too, that really limits transportation. Also, you have developments going on next to existing farms. So existing farms start to feel the pressure from the development. So people are like, well, why is there a smell? And why is there a noise? Well, because farming is noisy and smelly, and that's part
Mhm.
of, how it operates. Um, but these are all things, just the urbanization, it brings customers and it brings opportunity for marketing, but it puts a lot of pressure on the natural resources and on the land and on the lifestyle of farming.
Yeah. So when you talk about a micro farm operation, I'm just curious, I'm envisioning something similar to like an urban garden farm or a farm where maybe somebody is feeding their own family and then a few other families in their neighborhood. Is that a correct scale?
Yeah, and so I
Okay.
see, there isn't like a set definition for
Right.
micro farm, but I think of it as you have probably definitely less than five, even maybe 3 or 1 acre, but you're
Okay.
still producing food on that. Maybe you have vertical gardening, maybe you have, a garage full of microgreens. So there's a little bit of indoor and maybe hydroponics that come in with some of that micro farm, or it's that I've got a garden and chickens and I maybe sell a little bit extra, but I'm basically on a city lot. And I have seen more and more vendors at farmers markets that are kind of coming from that kind of setup, which is really interesting. But I just don't know about long term, how sustainable that will be in terms of a profitable enterprise. I think the potential for that to support your family is huge and very exciting. So
So we've touched on profitability a couple of times, and I'm curious if because you also mentioned this kind of upswing in the trend of prepared foods being offered at farmers markets. And so I'm wondering if you think that that's a profit margin trend where the profit margin is a little bit greater for a prepared food item than it is for produce. Because what we often tell people is that yes, the price of carrots or kale or whatever it may be from your local farmer, it's not that those prices are artificially high for that produce. It's the produce that we buy from the global food shed, right, or the global food system. Those prices are often artificially low because they're subsidized or, they're coming from countries with different price and dollar and currency markets. So, would you say that that is a part of the trend away from produce, maybe, is that profit margin and profitability?
Definitely. And you said that so well. Yeah, raw ingredients are always going to be lower value, even if you're putting a premium price on them. So even if you're charging organic produce prices, there's only so much you can charge for a bag of green beans or a head of kale, but it's costing more and more to make that product. Whether you're just looking at farmers trying to actually make some kind of living wage, which traditionally has not been the case. Some of the more successful farm families that I know and work with, one of the farm partners or one of the family members has an off-farm job that brings in a consistent income and maybe even provides the health insurance for that family. And this is really unfortunate. Farming should not be something that you do as a hobby that cannot sustain your family, but we see it. The other thing is that, yeah, so anytime you can add value to a food product, then definitely you can increase the price. And depending on, what it costs you to produce that or to process that, absolutely. And that might be why we've seen more growth in some of the smaller scale livestock operations and the, direct to market meat is, there is a little bit higher price point in that, and it can be more year round than, vegetables. You've got to do a lot of work to grow vegetables and produce them year round, especially in Idaho. But a food product potentially could be available year round. Meat products can sometimes be the way, if you time it right and you've got access to really good cold storage, you can be selling meat more year round. So I think that does have something to do with it. And I've known some growers that have really moved away from being the fresh produce center of market, to moving into other things like even producing hard cider or alcohol, really looking at where consumers are spending their money and where the opportunities for profitability might be. But we
Yeah,
still need fruits and vegetables. So
absolutely. I know something that helps a lot of our local farmers here is the CSA model. So folks who pay kind of upfront ahead of the season to have a weekly or bi-weekly delivery, or they can go to the farmer's market and pick up that produce, and that really helps kind of even out the profitability over the season, over the year for farmers. Is that something that farmers in your area as well really rely on?
definitely. And I mean, I think a lot of our farmers are doing CSAs in addition to selling at market because you kind of get folks locked in. You know that you've got those ready customers. Oftentimes they're getting that money for the CSA shares early in the season. So yeah, it takes out some of the volatility, it takes out some of the unpredictability, but then they do have to deliver on that. But I still see the CSA model is thriving, and I see people doing very small CSAs. I see still the large CSAs that are happening in our communities. So I think that model is still good and vibrant. The other thing I think that can support that is when you look at the seasonality of some of the markets themselves. So I'm not sure all the different ways that folks can access or buy local produce in the Wood River Valley. But here, most of our farmers markets, really the season for them is May through September, sometimes October. We do have a few of our larger markets, like in Nampa and Boise, that go through and have a holiday market all the way through till Christmas. But many of these vendors, they have product that continues. And so, there are quite a few collaborators and partners looking at putting together some kind of permanent market space that could be year round, for producers. Because like I said, the meat, as long as you can keep it on ice, it's going to be available year round. We have a lot of innovative growers that are using season extension and have produce almost year round, and could if there was a really reliable market for it. Um, so I think that is something that could really support, making that the easier choice, because during the winter months, it's much easier just to go to the grocery store than try to, find out online who's got what and, drive to the farm or arrange a pickup. So I think, yeah, we might talk about some of this later, but making a local food choice an easy and convenient choice, I think goes a long way to attracting new customers and creating consistent customers.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think, yeah, especially, with even just road safety, making it as accessible as possible. And then a huge part of the making the economic model sustainable is that continued and consistent demand from consumers. So if community members are prioritizing choosing local foods, then farmers and ranchers have that consistent demand to go off of, and they're more likely to keep showing up. I will mention for folks in the Wood River Valley, our outdoor farmers markets in Haley and Ketchum typically run June, so a little bit later, June through September. And then just this year, they've started doing a fall farmers market on Saturdays at the Grange Hall in Haley. And then that will continue through the winter as well. So we're finally moving towards more of a year-round farmers market model. And the Grange Hall is also such a fun setting because it's historically tied to agriculture in the community. So it's really fun.
That's wonderful. What a great resource. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think about you. You guys have a lot more challenges with winter getting around than we do. We don't really have that many excuses. We might have 2 days where we're like, we can't drive. But
Yeah. If it's okay with you, I might jump ahead a little bit
sure.
to question 6 because we were talking about, cold storage and processing sometimes being barriers to scaling up or sustainability of production over time. So could you please tell us more about the importance of on-farm food safety and how consumers can inform themselves about the products that they're purchasing locally?
Sure. That is a big question.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of how to start. So for a long time now, I have been involved probably more than I ever wanted to be or imagined that I would be in on-farm food safety. I was one of the University of Idaho faculty that was tapped to be part of our statewide rolling out of the Food Safety Modernization Act outreach, education, and technical assistance. So I've been working
Wow.
with our Department of Ag and the FDA and the National Association for Department of Agriculture, State Departments of Agriculture for probably, ooh, 10, almost 10 years now. Yeah, so a long time. Um, and I think that what we've seen is at first it was really terrifying to farmers that FDA was going to get involved in their farms and be as involved in food safety as they wanted to be because it had never happened before. So if you were a food product, creator, you were more familiar with FDA coming and inspecting your commercial kitchen, or if you had a processing kitchen on your farm, then you dealt with the health district in that regard. But nobody had ever come on your farm and said, what is that and what are you doing there? However, because of the early emphasis on education as regulation was being unfolded, I think we had a lot of time to prepare farmers, to work with them. And then also we have these exemptions and qualified exemptions for smaller scale growers, especially those that are marketing their food products directly to consumers. So
Okay.
I will say yes, it is still a burden on farmers, but I don't have clear evidence that it has been as detrimental as folks were afraid of. And the good side is that it has really opened a lot of people's eyes to some of the hazards that can happen on farm. Fortunately, we have not had, at least as far as I know, any statewide outbreaks that have been tied back to a small farm and to, any kind of pathogen widespread release on a small farm. But just in general, it goes down to how you manage the sources of contamination on a farm. And the sources of contamination are primarily poop,
Yeah.
primarily from animals and from people, and the way that we kind of handle the sanitary chain of events. So pathogens are spread by water, they are spread by wind, they are spread by human hands. So if we can establish good hygienic practices in our farm workers and our farm labor and in all of that, if we start with clean harvesting materials and storage materials and our produce is kept clean from the field to the market, we are managing the sources of contamination on our food, whether they be in water, in soil, in manures, and we're thinking thoughtfully about how we manage those so that cross-contamination isn't happening, then I think our food supply is very, very safe.
Mhm.
And on all the farms that I've been on and all the classes that we've taught on farm food safety, we are seeing wonderful examples of this happening. And I think the smaller the scale, the more control you have over all of those different elements. And I think while it is absolutely possible for a small farm to be implicated in a food safety event, typically we are seeing those outbreaks are, traced back to very, very large scale operations, and partly because you have the opportunity for a little bit of germ to then just go widespread and cover a large amount of product that is, going out to multiple states nationwide, et cetera. And I think that's why those exemptions were created for the smaller scale farm, realizing that their potential to make thousands of people sick was much smaller. They might make hundreds of people sick, which would still be terrible, but it would be maybe more manageable. But
Right.
like I said, I see great examples of food safety practices on farms. Anytime I go on a farm and I see that they have a hand washing station set up, right next to their porta potty, or I see that, they've designated separate tools for working with manure versus working with their edible crops, it
Mhm.
always makes me very happy. I feel very confident about our food supply and about our food safety. And there are so many regulations that cover, the production of meat products and how that is handled and sold. That again, I feel like, we're doing the best that we can. But I always do recommend that consumers wash their produce and cook their meat, and cook their eggs, because just because it is a small farm doesn't mean that those pathogens aren't there in the environment. It's kind of all of our part. It's part as a producer, but it's also important on the part of the consumer to just, be smart about it and make good choices.
Absolutely. And I know a fun part of buying organic produce, even if the local farm isn't necessarily organic certified, I know the farmers, so I know that they're using organic practices. That means that they're not using pesticides. And so sometimes you'll buy a beautiful head of lettuce from the farmer's market and you have, a little spider in there or something fun like that. So that's another reason why I always feel like even if there aren't chemicals on your produce, it's a really good idea to give things a good rinse.
Absolutely. And you don't have to go to the extremes. People do really weird stuff using different kinds of sanitizers, or, just fresh, cold running water is the best way that you can clean your produce.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to provide people with an anecdote, a real world current event, the carrot recall that happened a few weeks ago, we actually had simultaneously before that was publicized. Coincidentally, we'd been working with some local farmers to talk about scaling up carrot production so that more people in our community can have access to locally grown carrots. And so it was just an interesting coincidence that these carrots that had been coming from, some of them from an organic farm, had harmed, people across many states on the West Coast while we were talking with local producers about the opportunity to grow more carrots for people in our community.
Yeah. And, that came so much to the point too, during the pandemic in 2020, was that,
Yes.
and going back to, your organization, being resilient. How do we be resilient? And being resilient is having some food production in our own communities that we can rely on. And so if we are cut off from supply chains, if we are cut off from even transportation routes, as it very well could happen in your area. I remember when the Wood River Valley was having terrible issues just with the postal service, right? With being able
Yes.
to get mail delivered.
Yes.
So let alone, giant trucks of food. So having a robust local food system creates more resilience within a community too, even if it's just we have more carrots locally. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we've talked about demand a little bit, and we've talked about consumers being aware of on-farm food safety practices. I'm wondering how else community members can support local food systems, especially as these food systems face some of the pressures that we've talked about.
Yeah. And that's such a good question. And it can be a tricky one too, because I'm really a firm believer that local food and fresh, healthy, nutritious food should be something that is available and accessible to everyone. And it should not be only folks with a certain income bracket or a certain luxury of time, to prepare butternut squash from scratch, should be able to access the local food system. And so that's why really thinking about ways that we make local food more accessible and easier to choose, comes back to things like community gardens have a definite role in the food system. School gardens have a role in the food system. This photograph here is from an after-school program, I think in Lincoln County, where just, giving kids the opportunity to learn that food can come from the soil and it can come from a seed and that they can make that happen. I think gardening tends to create in us a much greater appreciation for agriculture in general because we understand how hard it is,
Hmm.
and also how wonderful it is. So anything we can do to support everybody having access to that if they want, and then also increasing the access to local food. So one of the efforts of the Farmers Market Association, Idaho Farmers Market Association, that I've been involved with for a long time, I'm currently on the board, is working so that markets are able to accept SNAP EBT or food stamp
Yes.
benefits. This can be huge. It doesn't always mean that it's always, going to be possible for everyone, but it increases that potential for access among more vulnerable populations. And then if communities and markets are able to provide a match for those dollars, then it really becomes even less expensive for them to access this local food than it would be at a regular grocery store. And then the money stays in the local farmers' pockets too. So I see that as wonderful. I like the idea of produce prescription programs. This is another one where we get healthcare involved. Um,
Yes.
to fund, and to prescribe local food and fresh food for folks that are really in need of it. So I see some of those as ways to increase access and consumption for everybody. And I think if you do have the means and the ability to just maybe make that little tiny bit of effort to find that local product or to find a farmer that you want to support, and to think maybe more thoughtfully about some of your choices, especially with regard to your choices for proteins, meat. It can be an easy step to maybe just say, I'm going to find a local egg producer and I'm going to get local eggs when I can. Sometimes it's not easy, especially in the winter when the chickens stop laying. But
Yes.
I really think like, making that choice to find one product or just make that little bit of extra effort because it does take extra effort and does take extra time, but it can have really, really big impact on your community and on your friends and neighbors that are committing themselves to this lifestyle to grow your food.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think about some of the kind of popular psychology advice when it comes to building new habits or shifting your lifestyle. A lot of that advice is to not necessarily focus on things to get rid of, but new habits that you can add in. And so I thought of that when you were mentioning, just starting with one product and thinking about how you could incorporate one more local product into your diet. The other thing I'll mention, because I know that in the Boise area, especially, you all have some pretty incredible, robust systems for this, but gleaning and food rescue. So a lot of times I know on farms, whether it's due to a shortage of labor, or sometimes it's intentional, to allow nutrients to return to the soil, but a lot of food can be left in the fields, or, in orchards. And so we're working on building more robust food rescue systems here. But for people in the Wood River Valley who are interested, our Hunger Coalition does have some really incredible gleaning volunteer opportunities that then allow you to take home a box of some of the produce that you've helped glean. So I'll just mention that so that people are aware. But I think gleaning can be another great opportunity for people to help support local ag.
That is great. And that led me to one of my thoughts. There was a question, maybe it was 6 or 7 here on your list, when I thought
Yeah.
about how food waste is a really
Yes.
important area that we all need to be working in. Um, I recently gave a presentation to a group of sixth graders who were on the green team for their school, and they'd identified food waste and composting as something they wanted to talk about. And having this conversation with these little humans, one of the questions was like, well, what is a landfill? And I was like, oh God,
Oh,
you know, so it's
yeah.
a giant hole in the ground full of our garbage. And they were just like, what? And so we
Yeah.
actually looked at the amount of food that is wasted. It would more than meet the demand of food that is, for folks that are food insecure.
Mhm.
Um, but it was just really fascinating to think about like what we can do in terms of food waste, and where we can start to reduce that, and where we can divert that waste. And I've seen some really exciting work, with recapture of surplus produce and then turning it into value add. So whether it's
Oh,
minimally
wow.
processing it so that it can, be a little bit more shelf stable, or it can be readily used by someone with limited kitchen skills, right? They know what to do with it. Yeah, and City of Good is an organization in the Boise area that has been really pioneering capture of local produce and processing and packaging, turning it into meals, turning it into a little bit more of a value product. So I just think there's a lot that can happen there, and I'm excited to see maybe the future of those sorts of things too. And
Yeah.
that ties in with that, the gleaning that we have a lot of food out there that is not getting used.
Yeah. And speaking to the compost for a moment, the ideal scenario is that there's no food to necessarily compost because all of it is being used. And something that we're focusing on right now is composting initiatives in schools. Like you mentioned, the presentation to sixth graders, and the statistic that we've found to be pretty consistent across schools in Blaine County is that it's annually, so per school year, it's about 14 to 16 pounds of food waste per student per school year. So when you kind of do the calculations and then think also about carbon emissions, what that food would do in a landfill versus when it's composted, it's pretty massive when you add it all together. So yeah, if composting is accessible to people, definitely something to look into.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And we are really fortunate. We're fortunate in so many things in the Boise community, but one of them is we have a municipal composting.
Wow.
We
Yeah.
have bins at our home. We have the option to have bins at our homes that we put compostable materials into, and then we have access to the compost. So it's really incredible. But what else can we do, and how do we target those places where the most food waste happens?
Right.
And certainly our home. I mean, that's where I kind of think that our food system starts at home, right? Our food habits and what we consume, what we choose, what we produce, what we throw away, you aggregate that, we are the biggest group, right? As just individuals. And then looking at some of our institutions that also might be major sources of food waste and, like you said, emissions. Yeah. And it kind of comes back to extension has always um, thought about the potential for youth to have an impact. That's why
Yes.
4-H was established. So we always think about how we can be teaching the youth and the next generation to be inspired to be these problem solvers. It's going to be in their hands. So they might as well have some tools and understand what they're dealing with. But I just love the idea of these little sixth graders taking these materials back to their lunchroom and saying, we need to compost and we need to take
Yes.
less food that we're going to throw away. And we need to think about what we like to eat and only take what we like to eat. They were so cute about it. And it was just really inspiring. Made you think, oh, there is some hope.
Yeah. And I think too about the aging demographic of farmers and ranchers, which you mentioned as well. And I think that making food systems and agricultural systems cool and fun, because they are, when you share it with the right narrative, making it cool and fun for youth is a huge way to hopefully then get, in 10 to 20 years, get them starting their own operations and helping that aging demographic level out more.
Yeah. And we've got a big job in in helping to make sure there are opportunities to engage in agriculture in the future.
Mhm.
And that's a much bigger problem than I can tackle by myself, right?
Yeah.
When we look at land use and land access and all of that. But yeah, but at least if we can get young people inspired and want to pursue this on
Mhm.
any kind of scale, then I think at least we're headed in the right direction.
Yeah. If you could encourage Idahoans to participate in one impactful, I know this is a tough question, one impactful activity to strengthen their community food systems, what would you encourage people to do?
That is such a good one. Just what would be the one thing?
Yeah.
I would say just to make a conscious effort to find one local product, right?
Mhm.
Maybe every day if you are a compulsive shopper, maybe once a week, once a month, even like on Thanksgiving, I'm going to find like one local thing just to have that process of finding out what is produced here, how can I access it, where is it, and then you start to find those layers to the story that, this is a real person that grew this for me, that made this available for me. This was grown in the soil of my region using the natural resources that are here. I don't think it's realistic to expect that everyone's going to do that, but that's what I would love to see happen. And there are lots of places to find local food in our area, starting with the Idaho State Department of Agriculture's Idaho Preferred website, where you can search by the
Mhm.
product that you want or where you live or what you're looking for. You can go on the Farmers Market Association website and find farmers markets near you. Often they have vendor listings, so you could even reach out and find those farmers on social media. Just maybe take that extra step to learn a little bit more about what is available in your area and how you could be a part of that local food system.
And I'll mention locally too, in the Wood River Valley, we actually publish a locally grown guide. So people can find that at grocery stores. It's free and some other main points around town. Yeah, that education is huge and then having people make local switches when they can.
And that is a fantastic resource. I've seen that a few times, and I just think it's wonderful. And I don't think people realize how much work it is to maintain a directory like that.
Yes. Well, and yeah, exactly. Things can change a lot season to season, and we saw that especially over COVID. So making sure that information is accurate too is really important. What is a recent development or trend that you're really excited about or inspires you in our local community food systems or in our wider Idaho food system?
Yeah. Well, something cool. There are lots of things, and there are like big picture items, and there but I really think about some of these little small steps. And one of them is we've been working, so University of Idaho Extension has been working for a little while now with Idaho Stars, which is still a part of University of Idaho, but it is a training and support group for early childhood. So preschool, daycare centers, in-home care.
Mhm.
They help to certify and to support, quality practices in childcare across the state. Well, we recently partnered with them with some funding from the Department of Health and Welfare to establish indoor gardening kits to as many of these centers as would want them. And so we're starting with
Wow.
about 100 statewide. They're in every corner of the state. And so far, it's just been incredible. The centers really want to have this little garden kit. It's like a 24-inch raised little fabric bed, and they get the soil and
Okay.
seeds, and they get the light, and they get everything. And universally, the kids have just absolutely loved it. And you've got everybody from, 1-year-olds up to, preteens that are engaged in the garden. They're growing things. They want to water it every day. They want to know when they're going to eat from it. And then we go back and we do some taste testing using the foods that they planted in their garden, because sometimes the plants didn't grow super well or they're not big enough yet after 6 weeks
Right.
to harvest. And we've been finding kids are so much more excited about vegetables, and they're actually tasting things that they never tasted before because they grew it and they were interested in it.
Mhm.
So again, really small steps, and we might be reaching just several hundred kids at once, but these are kids that are maybe going to establish lifelong habits and maybe an interest, like you said, in growing food and in eating food and in understanding that connection between food and the land and soil. And I'm very excited by what we're seeing, and hopefully that continues to grow.
Yeah, that's a fantastic program. I love that. And I think it's a great illustration too of how simple it can be. I think that if you're not familiar with gardening, it can feel intimidating to get started. People often feel like they need to have, they need to start with a big raised bed or start with something more complicated. Composting at home can be really complicated too, just as another example. But gardening at home can happen inside on your kitchen counter. And same with schools and educational programs, it can be really simple. So that's awesome. That's great to hear about.
And I love it. And it doesn't have to be tied to the season because they're
Right.
indoors. That's made it really nice, where school gardens have a lot of limitations in terms
Mhm.
of, when kids are in or out. So
Right.
this has been really wonderful, and I'm excited to see how it goes over the next year.
Yeah, that's
And
great.
that's something that absolutely would be available to folks in your area
Mhm.
if they are interested.
Yeah. And then one of our last questions is, what is your vision for community food systems in Southern Idaho in the future? So this could be, 5 years in the future, 50 years in the future. What do you envision for all of us?
Well, I would like to see more robust general participation in the food system. I would like to see opportunities for farmers to be able to expand and grow a more significant portion of the food that we consume locally, as long as it is, ecologically sound to produce that here. I would love to see a year-round farmers market, especially in the greater Boise area. I'd love to see a continued expansion of our mobile market because it really brings food to where people are and
Mhm.
makes it easier for them. It's not just a one-day Saturday event. It's throughout the week and it's in your neighborhood and you just have to walk across the street to the park. I really like that. I also would like to see our cities, our counties really putting their power behind preservation of open space that can be suitable for agriculture so that we don't lose this infinitely valuable resource that is really finite. The soil that is suitable for growing crops is very, very small. And if we pave over all of it, we're going to be in big trouble. So I see that. I just maybe see just a general more of putting the action where the rhetoric is,
Yes.
right? We see a lot of people talk about local, and then when you look at it, it's like, the grocery store has a sign that this is locally grown in Western Washington. That's not
Right.
not our that's not really our food shed, right?
Right.
So really thinking about that and how to make sure that that remains a part of what makes I think our community so wonderful is that we do have that local flavor. So
Yeah.
opportunity. I want to see opportunities continue to be available for folks that want to be part of this and to be able to, support a significant amount of your diet from locally grown products, which I think is possible here. We have a lot of potential.
Totally. And I think something that is so unique and incredible about the state of Idaho is that we have such different microclimates and soil structures and composition. And so when you actually look statewide at what we can grow, it's pretty incredible, the diversity of products that are available. And then we add value added products, meat and dairy, ranching. And so looking at how we can support the state economy, can you buy something from somewhere else in Idaho versus Oregon or Washington? That's always kind of a fun challenge to look into.
Yeah, definitely. It's
Yeah,
all around us, right? We just
it
have
is. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Are there any follow-up points on topics we discussed or other topics that you'd like to talk about?
There was one other thing that I was thinking. It was when we were talking about the growing, and one other thing that people could do would be just to plant
Yes.
a seed and to try to grow something. I would really encourage people, if they can, to explore the seeds that are available locally. And so, one of the best places I know to look is the Snake River Seed Cooperative.
Yes.
These seeds are grown all around the state by small scale growers. we just don't have anything else like that. And I don't think a lot of states do, where you've got, seeds that are being produced and selected for their suitability for growing in our area. And you're supporting local farmers with another enterprise that is sustainable for them in growing seeds. So I really encourage people, if you are going to grow a garden, hunt down those seeds and try to buy some local seeds. And I think they'll be surprised at the difference that it makes from a seed that was selected because it performs well in our area.
Totally. Yeah. And that also brings to mind, and I don't know if how often this happens in Boise or if it's a part of farmers market offerings, but we also have plant swaps and plant sales, like plant start sales at our Grange Hall. And often there are people in the community who collect seeds, sometimes even just wildflower seeds. And that can be a great place to find even more local seeds as well.
And you will meet just the most fun people at those seed
Yes,
swaps.
absolutely.
Passionate growers. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
great.
and so informed. Well, thank you again for your time, and we appreciate all of your insight. And I think that I loved that this was, so locally focused on the greater Boise area and also the Wood River Valley and what people can do, the local resources available. So thank you, Ariel. And I know I learned so much today. So hopefully viewers learned a lot as well.
Thank you, Hannah.